You were taught that everything is made of atoms. You were taught that atoms are mostly empty space. You were taught that if you zoomed in far enough, past the skin, past the cells, past the molecules, you would eventually find the tiny, solid, fundamental pieces that everything else is built from. That is not actually true, not one part of it. The things you think of as solid are not solid. The things you think of as empty are not empty. And the fundamental pieces at the bottom of everything, the tiny building blocks you were promised, do not exist in any way you would recognize. Tonight, we are going to go looking for the floor of reality. We are going to start at a place you know, a scale you can see with your own eyes, and we are going to travel downward, down past the scale of cells, down past the scale of molecules, down past the scale of atoms, down past the scale of the particles inside atoms, and then down past the particles inside those particles. And at the very bottom, at the place where our entire understanding of physics gives up and falls apart, we are going to discover something strange. We are going to discover that the word thing stops meaning anything at all. We are going to discover that the vacuum between atoms is the most violent region of space in existence. We are going to discover that there are objects we can never see, forces we can never escape, and a scale at which the universe refuses to be measured. We are going to find the floor of reality, only to discover there might not be one. This is a descent, a slow, quiet fall through every layer of the physical world. We will take our time. We will visit each step on the way down, and we will look at what lives there, because everything that exists between the size of your hand and the end of measurement itself is stranger than you have been led to believe. So settle in. Get comfortable. The ceiling above you is made of atoms. The air in your lungs is made of atoms. The screen you are watching is made of atoms. And every one of those atoms is made of things that should not, by any reasonable definition, exist. There is no good map for where we are going. The territory below the everyday world does not have familiar landmarks. The laws that hold at our scale, the laws about objects and locations and edges and surfaces, begin to bend, then twist, then break completely. We will not find smaller versions of the things we know. We will find things that cannot be described with the words we have. For most of human history, nobody knew any of this existed. For thousands of years, people looked at the world and saw stone and wood and water and skin, and they assumed that these things were fundamental, that a rock was just a rock, that a drop of water was just a drop of water, that the smallest thing you could imagine was something like a single grain of flour, or a single hair, or a single bead of dew. Then, slowly, across centuries, humanity began to peer downward. First with lenses, then with microscopes, then with machines that split atoms apart and fired particles through each other at nearly the speed of light. And at every new level of magnification, the story repeated itself. Whatever people had thought was the smallest turned out to be made of something smaller. Whatever they had thought was fundamental turned out to be built. The ground kept opening under them, and the descent kept going. Tonight, we follow that descent all the way to the place where it stops, where the ground does not open anymore, where the universe, for reasons we do not fully understand, puts up a wall. Let's go find them. Start with something you can see. A single strand of your own hair. Pull one out if you want to, and hold it up to the light. It is about 100 microns across, which is 1/10 of a millimeter, which is 4/1000ths of an inch. It is among the smallest things your naked eye can resolve without help. Below this, the world becomes invisible. But the world does not end here. It only stops showing itself to you. Even a single hair looked at closely is not a simple strand. It is a stack of overlapping flat cells piled on top of each other like shingles on a roof. The outer layer, called the cuticle, is made of cells that have died and hardened, creating a scaly protective surface. Below that is the cortex, which gives the hair its strength and most of its color. And in thicker hairs, there is a hollow core running down the middle called the medulla. A hair is not a single object. A hair is a bundle of dead cells glued together, and each one of those cells, before it died and flattened, was itself a small city. If you placed a drop of water on that strand of hair and looked at it through a decent microscope, you would see something that looks almost nothing like water. You would see shimmering motion, a field of tiny shapes drifting and colliding, the whole drop alive with movement you cannot detect by staring at a glass. Now imagine zooming in further. The hair vanishes from view because it has become too large to see. The drop of water becomes a landscape, and drifting through that landscape you would find your first stop on this descent, one of the most common and most overlooked objects in existence. A single cell. A cell is roughly 10 microns across, 10 times smaller than the hair you just held. And a cell, by any honest accounting, is one of the strangest machines ever built. It has an outer membrane made of fat molecules, arranged in 2 layers, flexing and rippling like the surface of a small sea. Inside, there are organelles, tiny compartments with their own membranes and their own jobs, floating through a thick fluid called cytoplasm. There are mitochondria, the things that burn fuel to keep you alive. They are so different from the rest of the cell that most biologists believe they were once separate living creatures, bacteria that got swallowed billions of years ago and never left. Every mitochondrion in your body is descended from one of those ancient invaders. They come with their own DNA, their own reproduction, their own history. The theory is called endosymbiosis, and it is one of the most astonishing stories in biology. Roughly 2 billion years ago, a larger cell engulfed a smaller bacterium, intending to digest it. For some reason, the bacterium was not digested. Instead, it kept living inside the larger cell, and the two worked out an arrangement. The bacterium would produce energy far more efficiently than the host cell could on its own. The host cell would provide shelter and raw materials. Over countless generations, the arrangement became permanent. The bacterium lost the ability to live independently. The host cell lost the ability to produce energy without its tenant. Today, every complex cell in every plant, every animal, every fungus, every organism more complicated than a single bacterium, carries the descendants of that ancient partnership inside it. The mitochondria in your cells right now are the children of bacteria that were swallowed 2 billion years ago and never escaped. They still reproduce on their own schedule, inside your cells, using their own tiny loop of DNA. They are older than animals. They are older than plants. They are older than the oxygen in the atmosphere. There are also in plant cells chloroplasts, which have the same kind of origin story. They were once free-living photosynthetic bacteria swallowed by a host cell and turned into permanent residents. Every leaf you have ever seen is green because of the descendants of those bacteria. The green color comes from chlorophyll, the molecule they use to capture sunlight and turn it into chemical energy. The process is so complex that humanity, despite a century of intensive study, has not yet managed to replicate it efficiently. But a bacterium figured it out billions of years ago, and the cells that absorbed them have been relying on them ever since. There is the endoplasmic reticulum, a folded labyrinth of membranes that looks, under a powerful enough microscope, like the ruins of a cathedral. It is the place where proteins are built and shaped and sent out into the rest of the cell. There is the Golgi apparatus, which sorts and packages those proteins and ships them to wherever they need to go. It looks like a stack of pancakes. It acts like a post office. There is the nucleus, which holds your DNA, your genetic blueprint, the instruction manual for the entire organism. And inside the nucleus is a smaller object still, the nucleolus, a dense region where parts of your ribosomes are built. The ribosomes themselves are machines the size of a few nanometers. A nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. A ribosome is a machine 1/1000th of a meter across, and it reads the genetic code and stitches together proteins at a rate of about 20 amino acids per second, all day, all night, in every cell of your body. There are millions of ribosomes in every one of your cells. There are trillions of cells in your body. And every second, every single one of them is building things faster than any human factory has ever built anything. There are also lysosomes, the cell's waste processing centers, filled with enzymes strong enough to break down almost anything that comes inside. There are peroxisomes, which handle certain toxic byproducts of metabolism. There are microtubules and microfilaments, the cell's skeleton and highways, constantly growing and shrinking and moving cargo from one place to another. There is the cytoskeleton, the internal scaffolding that gives the cell its shape and lets it change shape when it needs to, for movement or division or response to the outside world. Every one of these structures is made of proteins, and those proteins are folded into specific three-dimensional shapes. And those shapes determine exactly what each protein does. A protein that is folded correctly works. A protein that is folded incorrectly does not work, or worse, causes disease. The process of folding happens in microseconds, guided by chemistry. And a single mistake in the code can lead to proteins that clump together and destroy tissue, as in some forms of neurological decline. This is happening inside you right now. This is what you are. At this scale, you are not a person. You are a city of machines. Keep zooming. Below the scale of a cell, you find the smallest independent life forms in existence. Bacteria, about 1 micron across, 10 times smaller again. They drift and swim and divide, and inside each one is a stripped-down version of what is inside your own cells. No nucleus, no organelles. Just a coil of DNA floating in a soup of proteins, housed in a tiny sealed bubble. Bacteria come in an enormous range of varieties. Some live in ice, some live in boiling water near deep ocean vents. Some live in rock miles underground, in soil inside jet engines, in salt crystals, in puddles of acid. They have been found in almost every environment humans have ever looked at, and many that humans could not survive in for a second. There are probably more individual bacteria in a single handful of garden soil than there have been human beings who ever lived. And they are busy. Each one, even the simplest, is doing thousands of chemical reactions per second, absorbing nutrients through its outer membrane, copying DNA, building proteins, repairing damage, waste management, communication with other bacteria through chemical signals. A single bacterium is a self-sustaining factory the size of 1/10 of a micron, operating continuously, needing no supervision, powered by sugar or sunlight or sulfur or whatever the environment provides. Bacteria are older than anything else alive. The first ones emerged on Earth about 3.5 billion years ago. They had the planet to themselves for roughly 2 billion years before anything more complicated evolved. They invented photosynthesis. They filled the atmosphere with oxygen. They reshaped the chemistry of the oceans. Everything else, including every animal and every plant and every human, is a late addition to a world that was already crowded with microorganisms long before. Go smaller, and you find viruses. A virus is usually about 100 nanometers across, smaller than bacteria by another factor of 10. And a virus is not alive by any useful definition. It has no metabolism. It does not eat. It does not breathe. It does not move on its own. It is a tiny capsule, often shaped like a geometric crystal, sometimes beautiful, sometimes menacing, containing nothing but a strip of genetic code and a protein shell. A virus is an instruction without a machine. It is a piece of biological software waiting for a computer to plug itself into. When it finds a cell, it injects its code, hijacks the cell's machinery, and forces that machinery to build thousands of copies of itself. Then the cell bursts, and the copies go looking for new cells. Viruses come in shapes that look deliberately designed, even though no one designed them. Some are perfect geometric polyhedra with 20 triangular faces arranged in icosahedral symmetry. Some are long, thin rods. Some are complex machines with heads and tails, landing gear, and injection tubes that sit on the surface of a bacterium like a tiny lunar lander before punching through the cell wall and delivering their cargo. The structure of a bacteriophage, a virus that attacks bacteria, looks almost exactly like a spacecraft. It is not a spacecraft. It evolved to look this way over billions of years, because this shape does the job efficiently. The variety of viruses is staggering. Most of them do not infect humans. Most of them do not infect any complex organism. The oceans of Earth contain somewhere around 10 to the 31st viruses, a number with 31 zeros after it, which is more than the number of stars in the observable universe. There are more viruses in a teaspoon of seawater than there are people on the planet. Most of them attack bacteria, not animals. They are part of the ecology of every body of water on Earth. Without them, the oceans would die. Viruses are the simplest things in biology. They are also the things that have caused more human death than any war ever fought. They have been here longer than we have. They will be here long after we are gone. But even a virus is enormous compared to where we are going next. Inside that virus is a strand of genetic code. Inside you, the same strand exists in every one of your cells. That strand is called DNA, and it is the most famous molecule in human history. A single DNA molecule is about 2 nanometers wide. That is 2 billionths of a meter. If you stretched out all the DNA in a single one of your cells into one thin line, it would be about 2 meters long, 6.5 feet, all folded up and wound tight into something you would need a powerful microscope just to see. And if you took all the DNA from all the cells in your body and you stretched it all out end to end, the combined length would be around twice the diameter of the solar system. Twice, inside you, right now. DNA is a staircase, a double helix. 2 long chains spiraling around each other, connected by rungs made of 4 different molecules that we label with the letters A, T, C, and G. Every instruction for building every protein in your body is written in a 4-letter alphabet, spelled out along that staircase, read by ribosomes, and copied millions of times per second inside every one of your cells. The distance between each rung of the staircase is about 1/3 of a nanometer. A DNA molecule carries, on average, 1 rung every 1/3 of a nanometer along its length. This is an information density that no human technology has ever matched. A single gram of DNA can hold something like 215 million gigabytes of information. All the data ever produced by humanity could be stored in a sphere of DNA the size of a sugar cube. The chemistry that allows this is delicate. The 2 strands of the helix are held together by hydrogen bonds, weak electrical attractions between certain atoms, much weaker than the bonds that hold the individual strands together. This is on purpose. When a cell needs to read the DNA or copy it, the two strands need to separate temporarily, then come back together. Strong bonds would prevent this. Weak bonds allow it. The entire genetic system of life relies on a precisely calibrated weakness, just strong enough to hold the information together, just weak enough to release it when needed. We have reached the scale of molecules. And a molecule is just a collection of atoms bonded together. Water is a molecule. 3 atoms, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen, held together by electromagnetic forces and arranged in a bent shape that gives water almost every one of its strange properties. The fact that ice floats, the fact that water dissolves almost everything, the fact that it beads up on waxy leaves and spreads across glass. All of that comes from the geometry of one small molecule, 3 atoms, less than a nanometer across. If water molecules were straight instead of bent, life as we know it would not exist. The bent shape creates a slight electrical imbalance in the molecule, a positive side and a negative side. And this imbalance is what makes water cling to itself and to other substances. This imbalance is what makes ice less dense than liquid water, because the molecules, when they freeze, arrange themselves into a loose crystal with gaps between them. This is why ponds freeze from the top down instead of the bottom up. This is why fish can survive under ice. This is why most of the chemistry inside your body works, all because of a tiny bend in a 3-atom molecule. And this is where we have to stop and pivot, because we have been descending through the world of things that feel familiar: hair, cells, viruses, DNA. Even a water molecule feels like something. It has a shape, it has parts, it behaves in ways that, with a little imagination, you can picture. Everything we have looked at in this section is made of atoms. Your hair is atoms, your cells are atoms, the virus, the bacterium, the water molecule, the strands of DNA, all atoms. Every single thing we have described is a specific arrangement of atoms held together by electromagnetic bonds. The entire biological world, the entire molecular world, the whole of chemistry, it is all one scale. It is all the atomic scale, looked at from different distances and organized into different patterns. The word atom comes from the Greek atomos, meaning uncuttable. The Greek philosophers who coined the term believed that at some point, if you kept cutting matter into smaller and smaller pieces, you would reach a final piece that could not be cut any further. The atomic level, the fundamental unit. That idea sat in human thought for over 2,000 years, waiting for evidence. And the Greeks were right about one thing and wrong about another. They were right that matter eventually reduces to smaller units. They were wrong about which unit is uncuttable. The thing they called the atom, the thing that chemists and physicists for decades also called the atom, turned out to be cuttable. It has an interior, it has parts. Below the atom, the descent continues, and it gets strange in ways the Greeks could not have imagined. But DNA is still just molecules, and molecules are just atoms, and atoms are where reality starts to lie to you. Everything we have looked at so far is built out of something smaller, and that something smaller is where familiarity ends. The next scale down is not smaller in the way that a cell is smaller than a hair, or a bacterium is smaller than a cell. The next scale down is different. It is a place where things stop behaving the way things are supposed to behave, where size and shape and solid and empty stop meaning what you have always taken them to mean. We are about to leave the world you understand. Open the door. An atom is about 100 picometers across, 1/10,000,000th of a meter, 10,000 times smaller than the smallest bacterium, 1,000,000 times smaller than a human hair. Small enough that the word small begins to feel inadequate, because at this scale nothing behaves the way small things should. And here is the first lie you were told. You were told that everything is made of atoms, and that atoms are the fundamental building blocks of matter. That is half true. Atoms are building blocks in the sense that molecules are made from them, and you are made from molecules, yes. But atoms are not fundamental. Atoms are made of smaller things, and those smaller things are made of smaller things, and it does not actually stop where you were told it stops. Here is the second lie. You were told that atoms are mostly empty space. You have probably heard that if an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be the size of a marble sitting at the center of the field, and the electrons would be dust motes somewhere up in the rafters. That part is true. The distances inside an atom really are that extreme. A proton is about 1 femtometer across, 1/quadrillionth of a meter. An atom is about 100,000 times larger than the proton at its center. If you scaled a proton up to the size of a basketball, the hydrogen atom around it would be about 6 miles wide. So yes, an atom is almost entirely empty space. But that empty space is not empty. The discovery of the atom structure came in a series of shocks that upended 19th century physics. For most of the 1800s, chemists and physicists had been debating whether atoms even existed at all. Then, in the early 20th century, a series of experiments showed not only that atoms were real, but that they had parts, and that those parts were arranged in ways that made no intuitive sense. The most famous of these experiments was done by Ernest Rutherford in 1911. Rutherford was a physicist working in Manchester, England, and he wanted to test the prevailing theory of atomic structure, which was called the plum pudding model. The plum pudding model, proposed by J.J. Thomson, suggested that atoms were like spheres of positive charge with small negative electrons embedded in them like raisins in a pudding. It was a reasonable guess, given the limited evidence available. Rutherford decided to test it by firing alpha particles, the heavy, positively charged particles emitted by certain radioactive materials, at a thin sheet of gold foil. He expected the alpha particles to pass through the foil with only slight deflections, because the positive charge of the atoms in the plum pudding model was spread out and diffuse. What he found instead astonished him. Most of the alpha particles did pass through, as expected, but a small fraction of them bounced back. Some bounced back at sharp angles. A few bounced almost straight back toward the source. Rutherford said that it was as if he had fired artillery shells at a piece of tissue paper, and some of them had bounced back and hit him. The only way to explain this was to abandon the plum pudding model entirely. The positive charge of the atom could not be spread out. It had to be concentrated in a tiny, dense region at the center. When an alpha particle happened to hit that region directly, it bounced. When it passed through the mostly empty space around it, it sailed straight through. Rutherford had discovered the nucleus, the electron cloud. The region where electrons can be found is not a vacuum in the way you think of a vacuum. It is a region of quantum probability. The electron is not a tiny ball orbiting a nucleus like a planet around a star. That image, which you have seen in every textbook and every animation since you were a child, is wrong. Not simplified, not approximate, wrong. An electron does not have a location the way a baseball has a location. An electron has a probability distribution. a smeared-out region where, if you measured it, you might find it. Before you measure it, asking, "Where is the electron?" does not even have an answer. The question is malformed. The electron is not anywhere specific. It is everywhere it could be, all at once, weighted by probability, until something forces it to pick a spot. The shape of this smeared region depends on the energy of the electron. Low-energy electrons in hydrogen form a spherical cloud around the nucleus. Higher-energy electrons form more complex shapes, like dumbbells pointing along axes, or clover-leaf patterns with 4 lobes, or even more complex arrangements with multiple nodes and lobes. These shapes are called orbitals, and they are not the paths the electron follows. They are the regions where the electron might be found, the 3-dimensional maps of where to look if you try to measure it. Chemistry, all of chemistry, the entire science of how atoms bond to each other and form everything in the world around you, is essentially the study of these orbital shapes. 2 atoms form a bond when their orbitals overlap in a way that lowers the total energy. The shapes of molecules, the angles of water, the flatness of benzene, the twist of DNA, all of these are consequences of the geometries of electron probability clouds. You are made of shapes that only exist as probability distributions of particles that do not have definite locations. This sounds like a riddle. It is not a riddle. It is the most accurate description of reality that human beings have ever come up with. Every computer, every laser, every piece of medical imaging, every solar panel, every transistor in every phone, in every pocket on this planet, all of them work because this bizarre probabilistic description of matter is correct. It has been tested more thoroughly than almost any other claim in science. It keeps being right. So when you hear an atom is mostly empty space, what you should actually be hearing is an atom is mostly a ghostly probability cloud where electrons might exist. There is nothing in there that is truly empty. The region is full of possibility and full of potential and full of something that has no name in any everyday language, because no everyday language was ever designed to describe it. Now, why does matter feel solid then? You press your hand against a table. The table is 99.9% empty space. Your hand is 99.9% empty space. Why does your hand not just pass through the table? Why is anything solid at all? The answer is not that matter is solid. The answer is that electrons repel other electrons. The outermost electrons in the atoms of your hand and the outermost electrons in the atoms of the table are both negatively charged, and like charges, repel each other with enormous force when they get close. When your hand approaches the table, the electrons in your skin get within a certain distance of the electrons in the table's surface, and the electromagnetic force between them pushes back hard enough that your hand stops. You have never actually touched anything in your life. Every time you have picked up a cup, shaken a hand, hugged someone you love, your atoms did not make contact with their atoms. The electrons repelled each other and created a force that felt like contact. The sensation of touch is an electromagnetic field interaction happening inside your nervous system. You have never physically touched another human being. No one ever has. The closest 2 people have ever come to each other is 1 or 2 atomic diameters of empty probabilistic haze. Now, zoom in further. Past the fuzzy electron cloud, down through the mostly empty space, you find the nucleus at the center. The nucleus is a dense knot of particles stuck together. For most of the last century, physicists thought the nucleus was made of 2 kinds of small, solid balls called protons and neutrons. A proton has a positive charge. A neutron has no charge. Protons and neutrons have almost exactly the same mass, and together they account for virtually all the mass of the atom. The electrons flitting around the outside contribute almost nothing, so the atom has a picture. A tiny, dense center made of protons and neutrons. A huge cloud of probability around it where electrons live. 99.9% emptiness in between. This is the picture you have been carrying in your head since you were a child. Let me give you one more way to feel the scale difference. Imagine a single grape, a small fruit you could hold between two fingers. Now imagine that the grape is the nucleus of an atom. To keep the proportions correct, where would the edge of that atom be? Where would the electrons be flitting around? Not at the edge of the room, not at the edge of the building. The electrons of the atom, on this scale, would be more than a mile away. A grape at the center of a city with electrons somewhere out in the distant suburbs and nothing but vacuum between them. That is an atom. That is the foundation of all matter. That is what your body is actually made of when you look closely enough. And it gets worse, because you are not really made of atoms either. You are made of the nuclei and the probability clouds and fundamentally the fields beneath them. Zoom in further, and the nuclei themselves turn out to be not what they seem. Let us take it apart. A proton is not a ball. A neutron is not a ball. These are not the final indivisible pieces of matter. They have internal structure. They have parts. They are built from smaller things, which in turn behave in ways nothing in your everyday experience prepares you for. When physicists first began to suspect that protons and neutrons had internal structure, the experiments that revealed it were among the most bizarre in the history of science. In the late 1960s, at the Stanford Linear Accelerator in California, scientists fired high-energy electrons at protons and watched how the electrons scattered. Most of the electrons went straight through, as expected, because the proton was supposed to be a small, soft blob. But some of the electrons hit something hard inside the proton and bounced back at sharp angles, the way pebbles bounce off stones. This was the same kind of experiment Ernest Rutherford had done 60 years earlier, when he fired particles at atoms and discovered the nucleus. And it told the same story. There was something hard inside, something small, something that scattered the incoming particles like a tiny solid thing. The proton was not fundamental. The proton had parts. Those parts were given a name that has become one of the strangest and most famous words in modern physics: quarks. The name itself has an odd origin. Murray Gell-Mann, one of the physicists who proposed the theory, took the word from a line in a novel by James Joyce, where the word appears as a nonsense term in a passage about seabirds. He picked it because it sounded strange, and the particles he was naming were stranger than anything that had come before, and he wanted a name that did not pretend to be ordinary. The word stuck. Every physicist in the world now uses a made-up noun from an experimental novel to describe the building blocks of everything. The first quarks were predicted theoretically in 1964, several years before anyone had any direct evidence they existed. Gell-Mann and another physicist, George Zweig, independently proposed that the confusing menagerie of particles being produced in early accelerators could be explained if those particles were built from a smaller number of even more fundamental components. The math worked. The patterns the particles made, the rules they seemed to follow, could all be derived from the assumption that three kinds of fundamental particles, combined in various ways, produced everything else. Most physicists did not believe it. Quarks seemed too strange to be real. Among other things, the theory required that quarks carry fractional electric charges, amounts of charge smaller than the charge of an electron, which had never been seen before in any particle. No one had ever directly observed a fractional charge. Yet the theory required them. Then came the scattering experiments at Stanford, and the evidence for internal structure in protons started to pile up. The evidence kept piling up for decades. New accelerators kept confirming the theory. New particles kept being predicted and then found. By the 1990s, essentially every physicist accepted that quarks were real, even though no one had ever seen one directly and no one ever would. The indirect evidence was overwhelming. The theory worked too well to be wrong. And the story of quarks is where the world really starts to come undone. Before we go inside the proton, understand what we are about to do. Every scale we have descended through has been a scale of things. A hair is a thing. A cell is a thing. A virus, a molecule, an atom, even a proton, each one smaller than the last. But each one still a thing, still locatable, still describable in language that feels like language. Now we go down one more step, and things stop being things. A proton contains 3 quarks. A neutron contains 3 quarks. Quarks come in 6 different varieties, which physicists call flavors. And those flavors have names that sound like someone was making a joke and decided to commit to it forever. Up, down, charm, strange, top, bottom. Those are their actual names. In every textbook, in every research paper, in every university in the world. Up, down, charm, strange, top, bottom. Protons are made of 2 up quarks and 1 down quark. Neutrons are made of 2 down quarks and 1 up quark. The other 4 flavors, charm, strange, top and bottom, are heavier and unstable and do not appear in ordinary matter. They existed in abundance in the first fractions of a second after the Big Bang. They can be created today in particle accelerators. They decay almost immediately, but they are real, and they have been measured, and they exist in the same strange way that up and down quarks exist. The top quark, the heaviest of the 6, has a mass roughly as great as an entire atom of gold. A single quark, one of the fundamental building blocks of matter, heavier than an atom built of almost 200 other particles. Top quarks are so heavy and unstable that they decay before they even have time to bind with other quarks. They are produced in high-energy collisions and die almost instantly, never forming proper particles. They exist for a moment and then scatter into lighter quarks and leptons. The bottom quark, next heaviest, appears in various exotic particles that physicists study to understand subtle effects in the early universe. The charm and strange quarks, lighter still but heavier than up and down, appear in particles that live long enough to be studied in detail. All of these heavier quarks are real participants in the structure of reality, even though they do not exist in the matter around you right now. Every star that has ever formed, every collision between high-energy cosmic rays and the atmosphere, every spark of radiation coming from deep space contains them fleetingly. They are part of the universe. They just prefer not to stick around. Here is the first oddness. Quarks do not. Odd quarks, not very small size, not unmeasurably small size. No size at all. Every experiment that has ever been done to measure the size of a quark has returned the same result: 0, to the limit of what any instrument can detect. A quark is what physicists call a point particle. Its volume, as far as anyone can tell, is exactly nothing. This should bother you. Something that is made of something that has no size. A proton, which has a definite measurable diameter, built out of 3 things that individually have no diameter at all. How can 3 points with no size add up to an object with size? The answer is that the proton's size is not made of its quarks. The proton's size is made of the forces between its quarks. It is made of the fields that bind them together, not of the quarks themselves. Even stranger, the proton's mass is mostly not made of its quarks either. The 3 quarks inside a proton, if you just added up their individual masses, would account for only about 1% of the proton's total mass. The other 99% comes from the energy of the binding forces inside the proton. The kinetic energy of the quarks moving around, the energy stored in the fields that hold them together, the energy of the constant swarm of virtual particles surrounding them. Almost all the mass of the ordinary matter in your body comes not from the mass of fundamental particles, but from the energy of the fields that bind them. You weigh what you weigh because of fields, not because of stuff, because of interactions, because of forces. Pause on that for a moment. Stop and breathe. The weight of your body pressing down on the surface you are resting on right now is almost entirely due to energy stored in bonds that hold together particles that themselves have almost no mass. You are mostly made of interaction. You are mostly made of the places where forces touch each other. The tiny particles that physics calls fundamental contribute almost nothing. The activity between them is what you actually are. And this is where the second oddness begins. Inside a proton, the 3 quarks are held together by a force called the strong nuclear force. This is not a metaphor. This is its actual name. It is one of the 4 fundamental forces of nature, along with gravity, electromagnetism, and the weak nuclear force. The strong force is the strongest of the 4 by a huge margin. It is 100 times stronger than electromagnetism. It is 10,000 billion times stronger than gravity. It is the reason atomic nuclei can exist at all, because without it, the positively charged protons in a nucleus would fly apart from their mutual repulsion in less time than light takes to cross a proton. The strong force has a property unlike any other force in the universe. It gets stronger the farther apart you pull the things it is binding together. Think about that. Every other force you have ever encountered gets weaker with distance. Gravity weakens with distance. Magnetism weakens with distance. Electromagnetism weakens with distance. The farther apart 2 things are, the less they pull on each other. Not the strong force. The strong force behaves like a rubber band. When quarks are close together, the force between them is weak and they move around almost freely. As you pull them apart, the force gets stronger and stronger and stronger. There is no distance at which it weakens. You can pull and pull, adding more and more energy to the bond, and the force just keeps increasing. And then something extraordinary happens. At some point, you have put so much energy into pulling the quarks apart that the energy itself, through the famous equation linking energy and mass, spontaneously converts into new matter. Out of nowhere, a new quark and a new antiquark pop into existence. The energy you were pouring in becomes mass, and instead of separating the 2 original quarks, you have created 2 new quark pairs, bound into new particles, and the original quarks are still together with partners. You can never pull a quark out of a proton and hold it in your hand. You can never isolate a single quark. It does not matter how much energy you use. The harder you try, the more new quarks appear, and you end up with more particles, not fewer. No one has ever seen a solitary quark. No one ever will. It is not just difficult. It is forbidden by the laws of physics. This is called confinement, and it is one of the deepest and strangest properties of the universe. The most fundamental matter particles in your body, the things that make up every proton and every neutron, in every atom of every cell, in every organ of your being, have never been alone. They cannot be alone. They exist only as trios, bound forever inside protons and neutrons, locked together by a force that refuses to let them go. You have read about particles before. You have seen animations of them moving through space, colliding, scattering. But those pictures are lies at the quark level. A quark has never existed on its own in the entire history of the universe. The only free particles that ever existed as isolated objects were the ones that emerged from the Big Bang in the first tiny fraction of a second, before the universe cooled enough for quarks to bind together. After that point, never again. The force that binds quarks is carried by particles called gluons. Gluons are the messengers of the strong force, the way photons are the messengers of the electromagnetic force. But gluons are weirder than photons. Gluons carry the force between quarks, but gluons also feel the force themselves. Gluons stick to other gluons. The particles that carry the binding force are themselves bound by the binding force. There is no analog to this anywhere else in physics. This difference has enormous consequences. Photons carry the electromagnetic force, but photons do not themselves carry electric charge. A beam of light passing through another beam of light does not interact. Two light beams crossing in vacuum simply pass through each other, untouched. This is why you can shine flashlights in every direction in a room, and they do not tangle up. The carriers of electromagnetism ignore each other. Gluons are not like this. Gluons carry color charge, just like quarks do. Gluons attract and repel other gluons with the same force they mediate between quarks. This is what produces the bizarre rubber band behavior of the strong force. The gluons pass their force to other gluons, which pass it to other gluons, which pass it to yet more gluons. And the effect of all this is that the energy does not dissipate over distance. It concentrates. It becomes a tube of force running between the quarks like a string and pulling harder the longer you stretch it. Inside a proton, what you actually have is not three quarks. What you actually have is a seething chaos of three quarks surrounded by a churning storm of gluons constantly flying between them, plus a sea of virtual quark-antiquark pairs constantly popping in and out of existence. The proton is not a small, solid object. The proton is a whirlwind. The calculations that describe what happens inside a proton are among the hardest in all of physics. The equations are well defined. Every physicist agrees on what the equations say, but solving them, actually computing what a proton looks like on the inside, requires enormous supercomputers running for months or years to produce approximate answers. The proton is not simple. The proton is perhaps the most complicated object of its size in the universe, precisely because it is so small and the forces inside it are so strong. Physicists have given the property that quarks and gluons share a name. They call it color charge. It has nothing to do with color in the everyday sense. It is just a label, a name for the type of interaction that binds these particles together. There are three color charges, and physicists named them after the three primary colors of light: red, green, and blue. A proton contains one red quark, one green quark, and one blue quark, and in combination they appear colorless, the way red, green, and blue light combined looks white. The rule of the universe is that any object you can actually see or isolate must be colorless in this sense. Any combination of colors that adds up to white. any mix that hides the underlying color charge from the outside world. This is why single quarks cannot exist. A single quark would have a color charge. A single quark would not be colorless. The laws of physics forbid it from being alone. But there is another way to make a colorless object. Besides combining three different colored quarks, you can combine a quark and an antiquark, where the antiquark carries the anticolor that cancels out the quark's color. A red quark paired with an antiad antiquark gives a colorless pair. This kind of particle is called a meson, and mesons exist in the universe. They are unstable and short-lived, but they are real. Cosmic rays hitting the atmosphere produce them in showers. Particle accelerators generate them routinely. They are the second kind of colorless combination the universe allows. You and everything made of ordinary matter are made of the first kind. Three quarks, one of each color, bound together into protons and neutrons. Your atoms are stacks of these colorless trios, surrounded by clouds of colorless leptons called electrons. Every visible object you have ever seen is a pattern of particles that the universe has permitted to combine because the combinations are colorless. Any attempt to isolate a component that would not be colorless is forbidden. The rule is absolute. You are made of quarks. You have been a collection of quarks for as long as you have existed. And every quark inside you, every single one, is trapped inside a proton or a neutron, has been for 13.8 billion years, and will remain trapped until the proton decays or the universe ends, whichever comes first. There is no loose quark anywhere in existence. The walls of your bones are made of calcium atoms, made of protons, and neutrons made of quarks that are locked inside, cannot be touched, cannot be separated, cannot be examined alone, and have no size. And still we have not reached the bottom. Because there are particles that are not quarks, particles that do not live inside protons, particles that exist freely in the universe. And they are the smallest things we know how to measure, and their story is stranger still. Go back to the atom, past the nucleus, past the protons and neutrons, past the quarks locked inside them. Step outward to the probability cloud, to the electron. An electron is not made of quarks. An electron is not made of anything smaller. As far as every experiment ever conducted has been able to determine, an electron has no internal structure at all. It is one of the particles that physicists call fundamental, meaning it is not built from smaller pieces. It is, as far as we can tell, a building block at the end of the line. And an electron has no size. This is not the same as a quark having no size. A quark is trapped inside a proton and cannot be measured in isolation. An electron is out in the open. It flies freely through the universe. It can be captured, trapped, studied, bombarded with other particles, imaged in more ways than almost any other object in physics. And every single measurement ever made of an electron's size has returned the same answer: 0. No diameter, no radius, no volume, no surface, a point. Think about what that means. Something that exists, something with mass, something with electric charge, something you can capture in a bottle, and it takes up 0 space. This is where physics stops being physics, the way you learned it in school, and starts being something almost philosophical. What does it even mean to say something exists but takes up no volume? How can mass be packed into a region of 0? What is an electron actually? The honest answer is that nobody knows. We know what an electron does. We know how it behaves. We know how it interacts with other things. We can predict its behavior with stunning precision in any experiment you can imagine. But we cannot tell you what an electron is made of, what it looks like, what its shape is, or what it would feel like to hold one. These questions do not have answers, because the answers would require an electron to be the sort of thing that can have a shape, or a surface, or a texture. And an electron is not that sort of thing. The universe, at this scale, is not made of matter the way you thought it was. It is made of something else, and we do not have a good name for it yet. Now here is the thing that makes it all much stranger. There is a rule about how much we can ever know about an electron, and the rule is not a technological limit. It is not a problem of needing better microscopes or bigger accelerators. The rule is woven into the fabric of reality itself. It is called the uncertainty principle, and it was discovered by a young German physicist named Werner Heisenberg in the 1920s. The principle says this: the more precisely you know where a particle is, the less precisely you can know how fast it is moving. And the more precisely you know how fast it is moving, the less precisely you can know where it is. You cannot know both. Not because you are not clever enough, not because your instruments are not good enough, but because those two pieces of information do not simultaneously exist for any particle ever. Another way to put it: the universe has a speed limit on how much it is willing to tell us about any one thing. If we know where an electron is, the universe hides how fast it is going. If we know how fast the electron is going, the universe hides where it is. This is not a limitation of physics. This is physics. The uncertainty is built into the nature of the particle itself. An electron does not simultaneously have a definite position and a definite momentum, not because we cannot measure them, but because those two properties are not simultaneously real. They exist as a trade-off. Knowing one erases the other. Heisenberg originally arrived at this idea through careful analysis of how measurement actually works. To know where a particle is, you have to interact with it somehow. You have to bounce something off it. A photon maybe, or another particle. But every interaction transfers energy, and every transfer of energy disturbs the particle's motion. The very act of looking changes what you are looking at. At first, this seemed like a merely practical limit. A better measurement technique might reduce the disturbance. A smaller probe might cause less disruption. But the deeper Heisenberg and his colleagues went into the mathematics, the clearer it became that the limit was not about measurement at all. The limit was about reality. The particle itself did not have a definite position and a definite momentum simultaneously. The trade-off was not imposed by the observer. It was imposed by the structure of the universe. This has extraordinary consequences. It means that an electron in a tiny box squeezed into a very small region of space has enormous uncertainty about its speed. So enormous that the electron can be moving in almost any direction at almost any speed. It means that if you confine a particle too tightly, its own uncertainty will blow it out of the box. There is no such thing as a particle sitting completely still in a completely known location. Every particle in the universe, every electron, every quark, every photon is always in motion, always uncertain, always smeared across possibilities. One consequence of this is a phenomenon called quantum tunneling. A particle trapped behind a barrier, classically unable to cross because it does not have enough energy, can sometimes simply appear on the other side. Its position is not perfectly defined. There is a small but non-zero probability that the particle is already on the other side of the barrier. If the barrier is thin enough, that probability is high enough to matter. Tunneling is not a rare curiosity. It is the reason the sun shines. The nuclear fusion that powers stars requires protons to overcome their mutual electrical repulsion and get close enough for the strong force to bind them. The temperature inside the Sun is not quite hot enough for this to happen classically. Most fusion in the Sun occurs because protons tunnel through the repulsion barrier that should prevent them from touching. Without quantum tunneling, the Sun would not burn. Without the Sun, we would not be here. This is why an electron inside an atom does not simply fall into the nucleus, even though the positively charged nucleus attracts the negatively charged electron. If the electron were a classical particle, it would spiral inward, lose energy, and crash into the proton. But a classical particle has definite position and definite momentum. A quantum particle does not. The closer the electron gets to the nucleus, the more tightly its position is defined, and the more wildly its momentum must vary. The uncertainty itself prevents the collapse. The electron stays at a distance because its exact location is never a settled fact. There is another famous experiment that makes this concrete, one that has been run in laboratories around the world for over 100 years. It is called the double-slit experiment. You fire individual particles, one at a time, at a barrier with two narrow slits in it, and you record where the particles land on a screen behind the barrier. Common sense says that each particle goes through one slit or the other, and you should see two stripes on the screen corresponding to the two slits. That is not what happens. What happens is that the particles build up a pattern of many stripes, the signature of wave interference. Each individual particle, somehow, behaves as if it went through both slits at once, interfered with itself, and then landed in a specific location determined by the interference pattern. The particle is not a ball that goes through one slit. The particle is a wave spread across both slits, and only when it hits the detector does it become a single localized event. Even weirder, if you try to measure which slit the particle went through by placing a detector at one of the slits, the interference pattern disappears. The particle, when observed, behaves like a particle. When not observed, it behaves like a wave. The act of measurement changes what the thing is. The act of looking changes what you find. This experiment has been repeated with electrons, with photons, with atoms, with molecules containing hundreds of atoms. Every time, the same thing happens. Every time, the universe behaves as if matter is not really matter, but some hybrid of wave and particle, something that is neither one nor the other until you force it to be, by paying attention. Your atoms exist because the universe is vague about them. Let that settle for a moment. Every atom in your body, every atom in every star and every planet, and every breath you have ever taken exists in its current stable form because of a fundamental vagueness at the smallest scales. If the uncertainty principle stopped applying for even a fraction of a second, every atom in the universe would collapse. Everything would fall in on itself. There would be no matter, no chemistry, no life, no light, nothing. Reality is held together by a refusal to be pinned down. Now consider what this means for the idea of size. An electron is a point particle with no size, but it is never actually at a point. Its position is always uncertain. If you try to localize it, its momentum spikes and its position smears again. You can never catch an electron standing still in a known place. You can only catch it in a region of probability, a blur, a haze, a cloud. So what is the size of an electron? Is it zero because its intrinsic size is zero? Or is it the size of the probability cloud, which depends entirely on the situation, on how tightly it is bound, on how much energy it has, on what you are measuring? The honest answer is that neither definition is quite right. The concept of size starts to fall apart at this scale. Size is something you measure by finding edges, by identifying where a thing stops and the outside world begins. An electron has no edges. It has no outside. It has a spread of possible locations, and that spread has shape and extent, but that is not the same thing as a solid object with a surface. This is the first hint that something fundamental is going wrong with the language we are using. Thing is the wrong word. Object is the wrong word. Position and size and shape are wrong words. The universe at this scale is not made of objects. It is made of something that our vocabulary cannot reach. And it gets worse, because the next layer down is not a layer of smaller things. The next layer down is a layer where the idea of thing finally breaks completely. Up to this point, we have been talking about particles. Even though the particles are strange, even though they have no size, even though they smear into probability clouds and cannot be pinned down, they are still particles. Discrete, individual, countable. You can point to an electron and say, there is an electron. You can identify a proton and say, that proton is made of 3 quarks. The particles have names and masses and charges. They behave. They exist. Forget all of that. The most honest description of the universe, the one that matches every experiment we have ever performed, does not contain particles at all. It contains fields. A field is a mathematical object that has a value at every point in space. You already know what a field looks like in everyday life. A temperature field exists over the surface of the Earth. At every point on the planet, the temperature has some value. Some places are warmer, some cooler. A weather map showing temperatures across a country is a snapshot of a field. Or think of a magnetic field around a bar magnet. At every point in space near the magnet, there is a certain magnetic force with a certain direction. The field is invisible, but you can reveal it by sprinkling iron filings on paper above the magnet, and the filings line up along the field lines. Fields are real. Fields have energy. Fields have presence. And in the most accurate picture of reality that physics has ever produced, there is not actually such a thing as an electron. What exists is the electron field. It fills the entire universe. It has some value at every point in space. And what you experience as an individual electron is just a particular kind of disturbance in that field. A ripple, an excitation, a concentrated wave of electron field energy that moves through space and behaves for most purposes as if it were a particle. There is no electron. There is only the electron field and things that the electron field is doing. The same is true of every other particle. There is no quark. There is a quark field and excitations in it. There is no photon. There is a photon field and light is a wave in it. There is no gluon. There is a gluon field. There is no neutrino. There is a neutrino field. Every single kind of particle you have ever heard of corresponds to a field that fills all of space, and every individual particle is an excitation of that field. This is called quantum field theory. It is the most accurate description of reality that human beings have ever written down. Every prediction it has ever made has been confirmed, often to absurd precision. The theory has survived decades of increasingly brutal experimental testing. It is the foundation of nearly everything we know about the subatomic world. The precision of quantum field theory is hard to overstate. The behavior of the electron, for example, has been predicted by the theory and measured in experiments to a level of agreement that is equivalent to measuring the distance from New York to Los Angeles and getting the answer correct to within the width of a human hair. No other theory in the history of science has matched experimental results to this degree. The machinery of quantum field theory is mathematically dense and physically strange, but it works. It works better than anything else we have, and it completely rewrites what you think the universe is. The universe is not, fundamentally, a collection of things moving through empty space. The universe is a collection of fields, overlapping everywhere, each one continuously bubbling with activity, and the things are just the ripples in those fields, the local concentrations of energy, the excitations that behave like objects, because we tend to notice them, the way we tend to notice a wave on an ocean. An ocean is not made of waves. An ocean is water, and waves are what water does. Quantum fields are the ocean. Particles are the waves. The waves are not separate from the ocean. They are what the ocean looks like when it moves. Different fields correspond to different kinds of particles, and they all overlap in the same space. The electron field fills the universe. The quark fields fill the universe. The photon field fills the universe. At every single point in space, every one of these fields has some value, usually close to zero, occasionally spiking up into what we call a particle. The fields do not occupy different places. They occupy every place all at once, layered on top of each other like transparent sheets stacked to infinity. Every point in space has an electron field value and a photon field value and a quark field value and a neutrino field value and a value for every other known field, all simultaneously. When all those values are low, space looks empty. When one of them spikes, we call it a particle. When two of them interact, we call it a collision, or a decay, or a transformation. The interactions between fields are what make chemistry work, what make light bounce off surfaces, what make radioactive atoms decay, what make your heart beat. You are, at the most fundamental level, a region of space where many different fields are simultaneously taking on particular patterns. The patterns are your body. The patterns are moving, changing, reacting, always in flux. The patterns will hold together for some number of decades. Then they will dissipate, and the matter that made up your body will scatter into the environment, and the fields will settle back to their low-energy defaults, and the particular pattern that was you will stop existing. But the fields themselves are eternal. They were here before you. They will be here after. You are a temporary arrangement in an ocean that was always there. And this picture has a consequence that changes everything you thought you knew about empty space. Imagine a vacuum, the way most people do. If you take a region of space and remove all the atoms, all the molecules, all the light, all the gas, all the energy you can possibly extract, what remains should be nothing. True emptiness, pure void, that is a lie. A vacuum is the most dynamic region of space you can imagine. Even in perfect emptiness, the quantum fields are still there. They have to be there. They fill the universe. You cannot remove them. And quantum fields, even in their lowest energy state, even when they are as calm as they can possibly be, are not still. They fluctuate. This is forced by the uncertainty principle applied to fields instead of particles. Just as you cannot simultaneously know the position and momentum of a particle, you cannot simultaneously know the value of a field and its rate of change. A field that is exactly zero, perfectly still, with no energy at all, would violate uncertainty. So this condition cannot be reached. Even in a perfect vacuum, every field in existence is constantly jittering, constantly fluctuating, constantly wiggling around its zero value. Those fluctuations are not metaphorical. They are real. They can be measured. They have been measured. When a field fluctuates strongly enough, it briefly produces particles, a pair of them usually. a particle and its antiparticle popping into existence for an unimaginably short time, then annihilating each other and vanishing back into the fluctuating field. This happens everywhere, right now, in the air between your face and whatever you are looking at, inside your body, inside the walls of the room, in the vacuum of interstellar space. Everywhere in the universe, at every moment, particles are appearing and disappearing, blinking in and out of existence, borrowed from the fluctuating energy of the underlying fields and returned just as quickly. These are called virtual particles, and they are not a theoretical curiosity. They are essential. They contribute to the measurable properties of real particles. They affect the energy of atoms. They have been experimentally detected through their effects on everything from the behavior of electrons to the force between uncharged metal plates placed very close together in a vacuum, which are pushed together by a pressure generated by virtual particle activity. This effect, the Casimir force, has been measured many times. It is real. The Casimir effect is worth pausing on, because it is one of the most direct experimental demonstrations that empty space has energy. Take two flat, uncharged, electrically neutral metal plates. Place them parallel to each other in a perfect vacuum, a tiny distance apart. Classical physics says nothing should happen. There is no charge on the plates. There is no gas between them. There is no light, no field, no force. They should just sit there. But they do not just sit there. They attract each other. Slowly but measurably, the plates are pulled together by a force that has no classical explanation. The force was predicted in 1948 by Hendrik Casimir, and it was first measured directly in 1997. The explanation is that the virtual particles of the vacuum create a kind of pressure, and because of the geometry of the plates, there is slightly more vacuum pressure outside the plates than between them. The imbalance pushes them together. Empty space, with no matter between them and no matter inside them, exerts force on objects placed within it. This has been measured in laboratories. It is not a theoretical claim anymore. The vacuum is real, and it is active, and you can feel it with sensitive enough instruments. The vacuum is fizzing. Think of a glass of soda water. On the surface, bubbles are constantly rising and popping, appearing in random places, disappearing almost instantly. The liquid looks calm, but up close it is alive with motion. The vacuum of empty space is like that, but on an unimaginably smaller scale and an unimaginably faster time scale. Trillions of virtual particles per second, appearing and vanishing in every cubic millimeter of space. A constant, restless, seething activity beneath the apparent stillness of nothing. You have been told your whole life that a vacuum is empty. Every vacuum you have ever encountered, including the spaces between galaxies, the voids between atoms, the inside of a sealed bottle with the air pumped out, is the most energetic, violent, unstable region of space you can imagine. It only looks still because you are too slow to see it move. There is another way to think about this. The vacuum is not a container that things exist inside. The vacuum is the lowest energy state of the fields that make up reality. Everything else, every particle, every object, every galaxy, is an excitation above that lowest energy state. We, and all the things we can see, are the small ripples on top of an unimaginably vast ocean of potential. The ocean itself is what we call empty space. The ripples are what we call stuff. When a ripple fades back down to the level of the ocean, we say the particle has been annihilated. When the ocean produces a new ripple, we say a particle has been created. But the ocean is always there. The ocean is the substrate of everything. The ripples come and go. The total energy of the vacuum, if you added up every fluctuation everywhere, would be staggering. Some calculations in physics, pushed to their theoretical extreme, give a value for the energy of empty space so large that it defies comprehension. Other considerations, based on observed expansion of the universe, suggest the actual vacuum energy is vastly smaller. The discrepancy between the two numbers is one of the deepest unsolved problems in all of physics. It is called the cosmological constant problem, and nobody knows the answer. But one thing is clear. Empty space is not empty. It never was. It never will be. At this scale, the distinction between something and nothing has eroded. Particles are disturbances in fields. Fields fill the vacuum. The vacuum fluctuates. The fluctuations produce particles. The particles interact with real particles. The entire picture is one of continuous, inseparable, universal activity. There are no quiet places. There is no true emptiness. There is only the endlessly churning foundation of everything. And now we go further down, below the scale of particles, below the scale of fields, down to the scale where the universe itself refuses to be measured. Here is the question that has been waiting for us since the beginning of this descent. Does it ever stop? Can we keep going forever, finding smaller and smaller structures, smaller and smaller particles, smaller and smaller scales? Is the universe infinitely divisible? Like a ruler you can cut in half, and then cut that half in half, and then cut that half in half, and keep going until the end of time? The answer appears to be no. There is a scale, a specific measurable distance, below which the laws of physics as we currently understand them simply stop working. Below this scale, space and time themselves lose their meaning. Below this scale, the mathematics that has described everything so far begins to produce nonsense. Below this scale, there is no physics. This scale has a name. It is called the Planck length, and it was discovered not through experiment, but through pure reasoning by a German physicist named Max Planck at the end of the 19th century. Planck was doing something unusual. He was looking for a natural set of units to measure the universe with. Every unit we use in everyday life, every meter and every second and every kilogram is arbitrary. A meter is a meter, because a long time ago, some people decided it would be. A second is a second for historical reasons that have nothing to do with the deep structure of reality. Planck wondered whether there might be a set of units built out of the fundamental constants of nature itself. Units that any civilization anywhere in the universe would eventually discover, because they are written into the physics of the universe rather than into human history. He took three of the most fundamental constants in physics: the speed of light, which sets the ultimate speed limit of the universe; the gravitational constant, which determines the strength of gravity; and the reduced Planck constant, which sets the scale of quantum effects. He combined these three numbers in a particular mathematical way, and what came out was a length, 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 meters. Write that out. A decimal point, followed by 34 zeros, followed by a 16. That is how small the Planck length is, measured in meters. If an atom was scaled up to the size of the observable universe, the Planck length would be about the size of a grain of sand. Take a hydrogen atom, already 100,000 times smaller than a bacterium, already 10,000 billion times smaller than a human. Scale it up until it fills the entire observable universe, 93 billion light-years across. In that unimaginably huge atom, the Planck length would be a small object you could hold between your fingers. That is how much smaller the Planck length is than anything we normally talk about. Let me try another comparison. A single proton is about 1 femtometer across. That is already 10 to the negative 15 meters. Already small beyond intuition. The Planck length is 10 to the negative 20 additional factors of 10 smaller than a proton. That is the same ratio as the size of a proton compared to a region of space larger than several solar systems combined. The Planck length is as much smaller than a proton as a proton is smaller than a small galaxy. There is another quantity associated with the Planck length called the Planck time, which is how long light takes to travel 1 Planck length. This is about 10 to the negative 44 seconds, a number so short that physicists sometimes say it is the smallest meaningful duration, the tick of the universe's most fundamental clock, below which the concept of time itself may not apply. Everything you think of as instantaneous is made of something like 10 to the 43 Planck times. The blink of an eye contains more Planck ticks than there are atoms in your body. Why does this particular length matter? Why is it the end of the road? The answer comes from a thought experiment about measurement. Suppose you wanted to see something very small. To see an object, you need to send light at it and watch the light bounce back. But light has a wavelength. Blue light has a shorter wavelength than red light, and it can resolve smaller objects. X-rays have wavelengths thousands of times shorter than visible light, and they can resolve even smaller things. Gamma rays are shorter still. To see something smaller and smaller, you need light with shorter and shorter wavelengths. But light with shorter wavelengths has higher energy. That is a hard physical rule. Very short wavelength light is very high energy light. Now imagine you want to see something at the Planck scale. You would need light with a wavelength at the Planck scale, which would be light with almost unimaginably high energy. And here is the problem. Energy and mass are the same thing. Packing enough energy into a small enough region produces a gravitational field just like packing mass into a small region does. And if you pack too much energy into too small a region, the gravity becomes strong enough to form a black hole. At the Planck scale, the energy you would need to see anything smaller would be so high and concentrated into a region so tiny that the very act of trying to look would create a black hole right at the location you were trying to observe. The black hole would swallow your information. Whatever was there would be hidden behind an event horizon, inaccessible forever. You would not learn anything about the structure below the Planck scale. You would only create a new, tiny black hole, which would then evaporate through Hawking radiation, returning scrambled information to the outside world in a form nobody knows how to decode. There is no possible experiment, no possible instrument, no possible technology that can ever peer below the Planck scale. The universe has drawn a line. Below this line, measurement itself fails. Reality hides. This is not a limitation of current science. This is a fundamental property of space-time itself. Any attempt to probe smaller distances would require more energy concentrated into that region than space-time can contain without collapsing. The implications are staggering. Below the Planck scale, the concepts of distance and location may not apply in any way we can meaningfully describe. The language of space and time, which has served us for everything from daily life to the behavior of galaxies, may simply not extend into this region. The universe might be radically different below this scale, or it might be indescribable, or it might be that the concept of smaller than stops being useful the way the concept of north of the North Pole stops being useful. We cannot know. The wall is absolute. There is a curious connection here to the earliest moments of the universe. The Big Bang, the event that started everything about 13.8 billion years ago, began from a state that was, as far as we can tell, enormously hot, enormously dense and enormously small. Working backward with the laws of physics, we can trace the history of the universe back almost to the very beginning. We can describe what happened at 1 second after the Big Bang, at 1 microsecond, at 1 nanosecond, even at 1/1,000,000,000th of a second. But at the Planck time, the mathematics breaks down. Before about 10 to the negative 43 seconds after the Big Bang, our physics stops working. We do not know what the universe was like during its first Planck moment. The same wall that blocks us from seeing below the Planck scale also blocks us from seeing the very beginning of time itself. Everything we know about cosmology, every model of the early universe, every theory of how existence came to be, runs up against the same limit. We can get close, impossibly close, but we cannot reach the starting line. The smallest scale and the earliest moment are linked. They are, in a sense, the same wall viewed from two different angles. The universe has a beginning we cannot fully describe and a bottom we cannot fully reach, and the two mysteries might be the same mystery. So what is there below the Planck scale? Nobody knows. Many physicists suspect that space itself stops being smooth at this scale, that what looks like a continuous fabric of 3 dimensions stretching uniformly in all directions is actually made up of something smaller, grainy, pixelated, a kind of fundamental texture to reality that we can never directly see, but whose existence would explain things that our current theories struggle to handle. Think about this for a moment. Space, the thing you move through when you walk across a room, the thing that separates you from the ceiling and the walls, the thing that light travels through from stars billions of light years away. We tend to think of space as just emptiness, as the absence of stuff. But in modern physics, space is not the absence of anything. Space is a thing itself. It has properties. It has structure. It curves and bends under the influence of mass. It expands and stretches. It carries gravitational waves across the universe. And at the Planck scale, it may not even be continuous anymore. It may be made of tiny building blocks, the way a piece of cloth is made of tiny threads or a photograph is made of tiny pixels. Zoom in on a high-resolution photograph and, at first, the image looks smooth. Zoom in further, and eventually you start to see the individual pixels, the grid of colored dots that the image is built out of. The smoothness was an illusion. The image was always a pattern of discrete units. You just could not see them from far away. The universe, at the Planck scale, may be similar. What looks perfectly smooth and continuous from our perspective may break down into discrete units when you get close enough, but those units are too small for us to ever see. We can only infer their possible existence from indirect evidence, from mathematical consistency, from the way certain theories suggest that smoothness cannot go on forever. There are multiple proposals for what this texture might look like. In a theory called loop quantum gravity, space is built from tiny loops of quantum fields, woven together into a web. The smallest possible region of space is a single loop at the Planck scale. Smaller regions literally do not exist. You cannot point to a location smaller than a Planck loop because there is no such location. Space is granular. Distance is quantized. At the very bottom, the universe is built out of indivisible pieces. And those pieces are not in space, they are space. Loop quantum gravity is a serious theoretical framework that has been developed for decades by physicists trying to combine general relativity with quantum mechanics. It treats the structure of space-time itself as a quantum object, with discrete values at the smallest scale. In this picture, area and volume cannot take arbitrary values. They come in specific allowed units, like the pitches of notes on a piano, rather than the continuous variation of a violin. A region of space can have an area of 1 Planck unit, or 2 Planck units, or some specific combination of Planck units, but not any value in between. If this is true, then space is more like a crystal than a fluid. It has a fundamental grain, a smallest allowed building block, an underlying discrete structure that only appears smooth because we cannot see it clearly. In other theories, the structure at the Planck scale looks different. There may be additional dimensions curled up so tightly that they are invisible to us. There may be vibrating strings at this scale, which we will talk about in a moment. There may be networks, lattices, spin foams, holographic projections from a lower dimensional surface. The proposals are many, and the evidence is almost none. Because remember, we cannot look. The universe has forbidden it. What we can do is reason. We can develop mathematical theories that are consistent with everything we know about physics, and that would explain certain puzzles at higher scales. And we can look for indirect evidence, subtle hints that one theory rather than another is correct. But we cannot see the Planck scale directly. We never will. This is the first place in our descent where the universe has actively closed a door. Every smaller scale we visited before this was hard to investigate, but not impossible. Atoms were visible with early 20th century technology. Protons were probed with 1960s particle accelerators. Quarks are studied routinely today in machines like the Large Hadron Collider, which collides particles at energies approaching unimaginable fractions of the Planck energy. But the Planck scale itself, the gap between the Large Hadron Collider's reach and the Planck scale is enormous. We would need a machine far larger than anything we could build on Earth. The universe has a bottom. We cannot reach it. We can only theorize about what lives there. And the most famous theory of what might live there, the one you have probably heard of even if you know nothing else about theoretical physics, is a theory about tiny, vibrating strings. Here is the idea. What if the fundamental particles are not points at all? What if, at the smallest possible scale, the things that make up the universe are not zero-dimensional dots, but one-dimensional lines? Tiny, tiny strings vibrating, oscillating, humming at different frequencies. That is the basic proposal of string theory, and it was first developed in the late 1960s, originally as an attempt to explain the strong nuclear force. It did not work for that purpose. Something else took its place. But physicists noticed that the mathematics of string theory accidentally contained something unexpected. Among the patterns of vibration the theory described, there was one pattern that behaved exactly like a graviton, the hypothetical particle that would carry the force of gravity. Nobody had ever built a theory that included gravity at the quantum level. Gravity had resisted every attempt to be described by quantum mechanics. Every approach had failed, and here was string theory, designed to do something else entirely, stumbling into a description of quantum gravity almost by accident. That was enough to keep physicists working on it for the next 50 years. In the string theory picture, every fundamental particle in the universe is actually a tiny string, and different particles correspond to different vibration patterns of the string. An electron is a string vibrating in one way. A quark is a string vibrating in another way. A photon is a string vibrating in another way still. All the different particles of the universe are just different notes played by the same instrument. The universe, in this picture, is music. A symphony of tiny strings, each vibrating in a pattern that determines what it appears to be. The mass of a particle corresponds to the frequency of its string's vibration. The charge of a particle corresponds to another property of the vibration. Every distinct particle you have ever heard of from the electron to the top quark to the photon to the hypothetical graviton, is a specific way for a tiny string to move. If this is true, it would be the most beautiful unification in the history of physics. Everything in the universe, every particle, every force, every object, every piece of matter, all made out of the same single underlying thing, vibrating in different ways. Reality not as a collection of distinct building blocks, but as a single instrument playing an uncountable number of notes. The size of these strings? Somewhere around the Planck length, too small to see, too small to ever see, too small for any imaginable experiment to detect directly. This is one of the reasons string theory has remained controversial. It makes predictions, but the predictions are at energies we cannot reach, at scales we cannot access. It is beautiful mathematics, but mathematics is not enough to tell us whether it describes reality. String theory also has another strange requirement. It does not work in 3 spatial dimensions. The mathematics is only consistent if there are more dimensions than the 3 we can see. Different versions of string theory require different totals: 10 dimensions, 11 dimensions, 26 dimensions. The extra dimensions are usually assumed to be curled up so tightly, folded into geometric shapes so small that we cannot detect them. They would exist at the Planck scale, wound up in loops and shapes too tiny to unravel. Imagine a garden hose. From far away, a hose looks like a one-dimensional line. You can only move along its length. But if you look closely, the hose actually has a circular cross-section. An ant on the hose can move not only along the length, but also around the circumference. There are 2 dimensions, one of which is curled up so small that you do not see it from a distance. String theory proposes that our universe is like this, except instead of 1 extra curled up dimension, there are 6 or 7, and all of them are curled up at the Planck scale. At every point in our familiar 3-dimensional space, there is a tiny folded up shape of additional dimensions, too small for us to perceive, but essential for the mathematics of reality to work. The specific shape of these curled up dimensions is supposed to determine the laws of physics we observe. Different shapes produce different numbers of fundamental particles, different masses, different forces, different constants of nature, a slightly different shape, a slightly different fold, and our universe would be completely different. Atoms would not form, stars would not burn, chemistry would not work, we would not be here. If this picture is true, then all the specific features of our universe, from the mass of the electron to the strength of gravity to the fact that stable atoms exist at all, trace back to a choice of geometry made by the universe in its earliest moments, when it decided how to fold up its extra dimensions. A different choice, a different universe. We happen to live in one where the choice allowed observers to arise, but the reason for that particular choice, if there is one, nobody knows. Is any of this true? Is the universe actually made of vibrating strings dancing through 11 dimensions, with 7 of the dimensions hidden at the Planck scale? Honestly, nobody knows. String theory has failed to produce testable predictions at accessible energies. It has failed to uniquely describe our universe, instead allowing for an astronomical number of possible configurations, each of which could correspond to a different possible universe with different physical laws. Some physicists consider it the greatest intellectual achievement of the late 20th century, a beautiful unification of all the forces of nature into a single mathematical framework. Other physicists consider it a 40-year failure, a theory that has absorbed enormous amounts of brilliant talent and produced so far nothing that can be verified. Both views have merit. String theory is mathematically rich and deep and genuinely might be true. It is also possible that it is a spectacular dead end, a mathematical mirage that looked like a map of reality, but is actually a map of a place that does not exist. There are other approaches. Loop quantum gravity, which we mentioned earlier, takes a different path. It tries to quantize gravity directly, treating space itself as a network of tiny discrete loops at the Planck scale. There are causal set theories, which describe space-time as a network of causal relationships between fundamental events. There are approaches based on holographic principles, suggesting that all the information about the three-dimensional universe might be encoded on a lower dimensional surface. There are matrix models, entropic gravity, emergent space-time theories, twistor theory, asymptotic safety, and a dozen others. The holographic idea deserves a moment of attention because it is one of the strangest and most surprising claims in modern physics. It grew out of work on black holes in the 1970s, when physicists realized that the amount of information a black hole could hide behind its event horizon was proportional not to its volume, but to the surface area of its event horizon. That was bizarre. Volume grows faster than area as things get bigger. If information scales with area, then a large enough three-dimensional region of space can only contain as much information as could be written on its two-dimensional boundary. This led some physicists to propose that our entire three-dimensional universe might be encoded on a distant two-dimensional surface, the way a hologram encodes a three-dimensional image in patterns on a flat piece of film. The three-dimensional world we experience might be a kind of projection, a way of reading out information that actually lives on a lower dimensional substrate. If true, this would radically change what it means to be in space at all. The space would not be fundamental. It would be a consequence of something else. The holographic principle has proven useful in some specific calculations about black holes and certain theoretical universes. But whether it applies to our actual universe remains open. It is one more candidate answer to the question of what reality looks like at its smallest scales. And like all the others, it is currently unproven. All of them are attempts to understand what happens below the Planck scale. None of them has been verified. None of them, most likely, will be verified in our lifetimes. Maybe none of them will ever be verified. This is the honest position. We have walked you all the way down to the smallest scale accessible to modern physics, and at the bottom, we have stopped. Because we have to. Because the laws of physics themselves block the way down. The theories beyond this point are beautiful, and some of them are probably partly correct, but they are currently unfalsifiable. They are speculation dressed in equations. And it may always be that way. It may be that human beings will never learn what happens at the Planck scale, that the mystery at the bottom of reality will simply remain a mystery. Not because we are not clever enough, but because the universe has structured itself to hide its foundations from any observer living inside it. There is something almost poetic about this. Every layer we have visited tonight has given up its secrets when pressed hard enough. The cell yielded to the microscope. The atom yielded to scattering experiments. The proton yielded to particle accelerators. The quark yielded to theoretical confinement. The electron yielded to field theory. Every layer opened when we knocked on its door with sufficient energy, until we reached the last door. At the Planck scale, the universe refuses. It does not let us pass. It does not let us see. It sets a wall, and the wall is made of the very fabric of space-time itself. And any attempt to break through creates a tiny black hole that devours the attempt and returns nothing. The floor of reality exists, but we cannot touch it. We can only reason about it from above and wonder. Let us climb back out. You started this descent with a strand of hair, something you could see with your own eyes. You ended at a scale where nothing can be seen. Between those 2 points, you visited every layer of the physical world. Climb back up with me, slowly. At the Planck scale, space itself may be granular. Tiny loops or strings or networks may be the ultimate texture of the universe. We do not know. We cannot see. The door is closed. Below this level, the rules we have for describing reality simply stop applying. Distance becomes meaningless. Time becomes meaningless. Even the concept of here and there may not exist. Whatever is at the bottom, if anything is at the bottom, belongs to a physics we have not yet written. One step up, the quantum fields fill all of space. Every point in the universe is suffused with the field of every kind of particle that exists. The fields fluctuate, seething, producing virtual particles that flash in and out of existence. There is no region of space that is ever truly still. The vacuum between galaxies, the vacuum between atoms, the vacuum in the deepest cave on Earth, all of them are roiling oceans of quantum activity, calm only in the sense that the average over time is close to zero, never calm in the sense of being truly still. One step up, individual particles emerge as ripples in the fields. Electrons, quarks, photons, neutrinos. Each one a disturbance in the underlying field, behaving like a particle because our instruments register them as particles, but really waves, really excitations, really something that our everyday words cannot quite capture. These are the things that make up you. These are the things that make up every star. These are the things that make up the light traveling between galaxies. The same few kinds of ripples, combining and recombining across the entire universe for nearly 14 billion years. One step up, the electron, a point particle with no size, is caught in the electromagnetic pull of a nucleus. The uncertainty principle refuses to let it fall in. The electron smears across a probability cloud, defining the shape and the size of the atom. The atom exists because the universe is vague. If the universe were precise, if every particle had a definite location and a definite momentum at all times, matter itself could not exist. The vagueness is not a flaw in our knowledge. The vagueness is the structure that allows anything stable to be. One step up, inside the nucleus, 3 quarks are locked together forever by the strong force, which grows stronger with distance like an unbreakable rubber band. The proton, the neutron, tiny whirlwinds of quarks and gluons and virtual pairs, held together in a trio of primary colors that always combines to white, a balance that the universe enforces and never permits to break. Every proton in your body has been carrying its 3 quarks since the beginning of time and will keep carrying them until the end. One step up, the atom itself sits in the lattice of a molecule, hydrogen and oxygen, DNA, protein, the building blocks of chemistry, the structures that will eventually become everything you recognize in the world around you. Every atom in the molecule was once the core of a dying star. The iron in your blood was forged in a supernova. The calcium in your bones was cooked inside an ancient giant that exploded billions of years ago. The oxygen in your lungs, the carbon in your cells, the nitrogen in your proteins, all of it comes from stars that lived and died long before the Earth existed. One step up, the molecule is part of a virus, a crystalline package of instructions, or part of a bacterium, a single cell without a nucleus, a stripped-down unit of life, or part of one of your own cells, a vast and complex machine with organelles and membranes and ribosomes building proteins at dizzying speed. One step up, the cell is part of a tissue. The tissue is part of an organ. The organ is part of a body. The body is yours. And here you are, made of cells, made of molecules, made of atoms, made of nuclei and electrons, made of protons and neutrons, made of quarks, made, ultimately, of ripples in fields that fill the entire universe. And beneath those ripples, at the bottom of everything, a scale we cannot reach, a texture we cannot see. But do not stop at your body. Keep climbing. Your body is on the surface of a planet. The planet is roughly 8,000 miles across, a ball of rock and metal orbiting a star. The rock and metal are made of atoms. The atoms were forged in earlier stars. Every ounce of the Earth's mass is leftover debris from older suns that died before the sun existed. You are standing on a graveyard of stars. The star you orbit is one of about 100 billion stars in our galaxy. 100 billion, a number so large that if you tried to count them at one per second, it would take you 3,000 years. That is one galaxy. That is just our galaxy. Our galaxy is one of about 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. 2 trillion. Each one containing hundreds of billions of stars. Each star with its own planets, its own radiation, its own accidents of chemistry. The total number of stars in the observable universe is something like 10 to the 22. That is 10,000 billion. A 1 followed by 22 zeros. More stars than grains of sand on every beach on Earth combined. And the galaxies themselves are not scattered randomly. They are organized into clusters. The clusters are organized into superclusters. The superclusters form chains and walls and sheets, separated by enormous voids that contain almost nothing. All of this structure, stretched across space, forms what astronomers call the cosmic web, a vast three-dimensional network of matter arranged into filaments and knots, looking like neurons in some unimaginably large brain, or roots in some unimaginably old tree. And you, at the center of your own awareness, are a single small body on a single small planet, orbiting a single small star in a single galaxy among 2 trillion galaxies in this web. And within you, at this very moment, every quark is locked in its trio, every electron is smeared in its probability cloud, every field is fluctuating, every virtual particle is blinking in and out of existence. Every rule of the universe that we have described tonight is operating simultaneously in every cubic nanometer of your body. You are connected in the most direct possible way to the smallest and the largest scales in existence. The same laws that govern the Planck scale govern the cosmic web. The same fields that jitter in the vacuum between galaxies jitter inside your lungs. There is no place where one ends and another begins. Reality is one single thing of impossible complexity, and you are reading this paragraph from inside it. Every atom in your body was forged inside a dying star. Every proton was created in the first microsecond of the Big Bang. Every quark has been locked inside its companions for nearly 14 billion years. Every electron is older than every star you have ever seen. And all of it, every layer of you, is made of things that behave in ways that break language. Things that are not things. Particles that are not particles. Empty space that is not empty. Distances that cannot be measured. You are, in the most literal sense, a standing wave in the quantum fields of the universe. A pattern, a persistence, a temporary arrangement of ripples that has held together long enough to ask what it is made of. And the answer is this: you are made of mystery. You are made of a layered stack of stranger and stranger things, each layer less solid than the last, each layer further from the everyday world of objects, each layer closer to a bottom that hides itself and may not exist at all. You are made of fields that seethe in empty space. You are made of particles that have no size. You are made of forces that get stronger when you try to pull them apart. You are made of probability clouds and virtual pairs and color-locked triangles and vibrating strings and perhaps, at the very bottom, something we have no name for. The universe built you out of impossibilities. It used rules that no ordinary language can describe. It combined the weirdest physics in existence at the smallest scales imaginable. And out of that combination came something that can sit in the quiet of the night and wonder about it. That is what you are. That is what everything is. Somewhere far above the Planck scale, far above the quark, far above the atom and the cell and the body, the universe has organized itself into patterns that can observe their own foundations. Patterns that can stare into the smallest distances and ask what is there. Patterns that can descend layer by layer through the fabric of reality and find, at the bottom, the same word written on every door. Unknown, unknown, unknown. And somehow, that is not a failure. That is the most honest answer the universe can give. There is more below. There is always more below, and as far as we can tell, we will never see it. The floor of reality exists, or it does not. We cannot go there. We can only stand on top of it, in the strange and improbable patterns we call ourselves, and listen to the quiet humming of fields we will never directly perceive, and feel the faint pressure of particles that never touched anything, and know, deep in the layered structure of our own existence, that we are made of something the universe has chosen to keep to itself. Consider how strange it is that we have come this far. A few thousand years ago, nobody knew that atoms existed. A few hundred years ago, nobody knew that cells existed. A century ago, nobody knew that atoms had internal structure. 50 years ago, nobody had ever directly detected a quark. And now, here we are, descending through layer after layer of the microscopic world, knowing more than anyone who came before us, and still arriving at a wall we cannot see past. Every generation has thought it was close to understanding the bottom. Every generation has been wrong. Every generation has discovered that the universe is deeper, stranger, more unreachable than it looked. Maybe our generation is the same. Maybe the Planck scale is a wall, because we do not yet know how to see past it. The way the cell was a wall before microscopes. The way the atom was a wall before scattering experiments. Maybe the next generation will find a new way down, and the mystery will retreat one more layer, and the universe will reveal another floor underneath the one we thought was final. Or maybe not. Maybe the Planck scale really is the end. Maybe the universe has decided that some things are for it alone, and no pattern inside it, no matter how clever, will ever be permitted to know them. Either way, the mystery is there. Either way, tonight, right now, inside you, the fields are fluctuating, and the quarks are locked, and the electrons are smeared, and the vacuum is seething, and all of it, every piece, is part of a structure so deep that most of it will stay hidden from your eyes for your entire life. And still, you exist. Still, the pattern holds. Still, the wave stands. Sleep well. The smallest things in the universe are watching over you. They are inside you. They are you. And the mystery of what they actually are will still be waiting, exactly where it has always been when you wake.